But there's that other part of the process after you finish the book, which is the publication process, and I wondered if you might say a word or two about that process, any big surprises. I'm sure you had to find an agent and then go through the usual sets of some people hating the book, some people liking the book, and anything you'd like to say about that?
Well, I got an agent just by using the web. I just got on a site called predatorsandeditors.com and found my agent that way. I knew I wanted to sort of query only agents that would work on the computer to cut out mailing costs. I did send some things out in the mail really early, but mostly I just worked on the computer to do it, and got some interest early. And got a really good agent who was new and had never sold a novel, but worked with a pretty good up-and-coming agency in New York, and was sort of excited to go out and sell it. And we sort of were a good match, I think, just sort of both of us starting out. And I think the most interesting thing that I found in the publication process was the editing work that went into it. You know, they want it to be, one of the things that I noticed when I sent it to New York is the novel obviously has a ton of switchbacks and red herrings and false leads and trapdoors and all of that stuff. And so when my editor got a hold of it at Random House, you know, she said, we need to work on some of this stuff because there are some illogical movements in it. Things that aren't, something will happen and then 100 pages later you'll reference it and then it'll just drop out of the novel. So we worked on that, and that was really, really tough because I'm not a logical person. It's ironic that I've written a novel about logic class, but I just sort of am very free form. I wanted things to just happen organically in these books, and so I often don't think about the logic of an event. But obviously you can't have a reader doing that, or they'll just kind of put the book down and say, I'm not going to buy that. And so that was the most surprising thing, how much we worked on rewriting, redoing, getting those sort of loose ends all tied up. And that took, you know, 4 or 5 months to do that, working, you know, pretty steadily through that time.
But it's wonderful to have somebody point those things out to you, because as a writer you are so deeply into the story you don't always notice, you know, which ends are loose. And I love every writer needs a really good editor. So and I'm glad the editing process turned out to be, I think, ultimately a positive process.
Very positive, yeah, definitely. She was, Sally Kim was my editor, and she was great. But let me say one more word about that, because this often comes up at writers' conferences I attend. Writer will say to me, what did you think about the editing process? Were you open to what the editor said? And I know from reading writers' comments online, they often say things like, I couldn't go with an editor's comments. I just, this is my work, and I would really be hesitant. I wasn't like that at all, and I would really say, if you are an aspiring writer, do not do that, because, and here's my rationale for it, with 2 things. One, these people know a ton about books. They know a ton about selling books. It is your book, but when they buy it, it is also partly their book as well. And they have worked a lot on publicity, on how they're going to market it, on how they're going to sell it. And those things, I mean, it's a commercial sort of aspect of the thing, but it plays a part in how the book is written. And so they are indebted to, they're invested in your product, which you've done, and I think they deserve respect because of that. Secondly, and more importantly, how many times have you as a writer said to yourself, often we don't say it aloud, I wish somebody would pay attention to my work. You can't just go out on the street and hand your manuscript to somebody and say, read this. Often people in your family, they're too busy to read. Reading is this unusual thing that takes time to do it. It takes sort of a psychological attention. You have to sort of sit still. And a lot of people have such busy lives, they can't sit still. And so because we've been pining silently for people to pay attention to our work for years, literally years, it seems to me sort of oxymoronic and not right to say to an editor, this is my work. They're paying attention to your work finally. These people have, and they've paid money for your work. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to sort of, you know, shun them. I was interested in what the people in New York had to say, and my agent did a lot of stuff with the book even before it got to my editor. And I was interested in that. I didn't agree with 100% of it and didn't do 100% of it, but we ended up doing a lot of it. And I got you know, and usually what my editor would do is she would say, okay, here's a problem, here's a loose end, you've got two choices.
Right.
Maybe you can pick one, or
Right.
think of something on your own. It wasn't
Right.
like she came to me and said, I hate this, take it out.
Right.
It doesn't work like that.
Right, and it is kind of a more collaborative process
Absolutely,
than people often think. And I think that probably far more than we realize with the great literature that we've read, there was a certain amount of collaboration in there at some point. And,
Yes.
and you know, it is a solitary thing, but it's wonderful to have somebody engaged with it as deeply as your editor would be. So would you have any advice, your advice basically then for writers who are beginning to negotiate this publication process? It would be sort of stay open to suggestions that people make, give them a chance to look at your work and be open to different kinds of feedback. Basically.
Yeah, and going sort of on with that, believe in your work.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're going to be talking to these people. They want you to believe that you can personally sell it, and that you will be able to revise it in a sort of confident fashion, because revision is all about having confidence in one's choices. And so I would say don't be passive. If you're presenting a manuscript to someone, even to an agent, do not say, here's my best work. You know, it's not great, but you know, be confident in it. I mean, you've done it. You've written a novel. That's a huge thing, and sort of stand up behind it. I think also read. Read as much as you possibly can. Read in your genre, read out of your genre. Know what you're talking about when it comes time to talk about marketing decisions and those kinds of things, because they will ask you. They did with me. They came to me and they asked me, what kinds of books do you think are similar to this? You know, do you have any ideas of who might blurb it? They want you to kind of know a little bit about the market. I mean, that's not as important as the manuscript itself.
Right.
But it is extremely important.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm interested in a little bit about your being from Kentucky. Of course, in our series, we feature writers from Kentucky and with strong Kentucky connections. And I wondered what your perception is of yourself as a Kentucky writer. Do you think of yourself this way? And you were born, you're not originally from Louisville, but you were born and grew up in Kentucky. Do you tell us a little bit about your life experience?
I grew up in a town called Whitley City, which is near Somerset. And I went to college in Danville at Center, and now my wife and I and children live in Louisville. So and we also live in Owensboro, so we've lived all over the state. And I love Kentucky. I think when I went to school in New York, that one of the first kind of thoughts I had was I want to write Southern fiction, and I want to do it. And I had already been doing it a little bit, but I said, I'm going to make up my mind. This is what I'm going to be known for here, because nobody obviously in New York was writing Southern fiction.
Right.
And I found that I didn't do it very well. And the reason that I didn't do it very well was because Kentucky is in the South in general is such a powerful sort of place, I think, and the people are so powerful. They are usually more interesting than the caricatures that I was writing. And I wasn't doing them a service. I was sort of making them cartoonish. And so I moved away from Southern literature but in my writing, but I'm still interested in it, in reading it. And I think mostly because that's where I came from. That's what I was reading the most when I started writing fiction in college. A writer like Lee Smith, for instance, who's not a Kentuckian, but a great Southern writer.
Yeah.
She had a profound impact on my style. And that sort of first-person, confessional, funny. I mean, she is a hilarious writer.
Wonderful, yeah.
Barry Hannah was another one.
Yes.
And I remember when I read Airships, Barry Hannah's first collection of stories for the first time, how brutal it is, and how unpolitically correct it is, but also how sad, and how you can kind of see the demons that Hannah had. And it's fiction unlike any that I had ever read, and probably any that I've read since, because he lays everything out. He lays everything bare. Only in the South could you do that. I do see Kentucky as kind of a tweener state. I think it's not Southern, it's not Northern, especially if you get up into Louisville. And that was interesting as well. And one of the reasons I set the book in Indiana is I wanted it to have that kind of rural feel to it. These characters, they go to trailer homes.
Right.
They kind of are in the back, they're on the back road searching for this missing girl. But I also wanted it to be sort of mainstream and more modern as well.
Right.
But I think the reason I moved from Southern literature was only because of my own kind of misgivings about my direction, where I wanted to go. But I think it's a profound art form, Southern writing is, and I don't think any other regional writing can touch it.
I think I would agree, of course, and I think there's so many important writers emerging now from our state, and I would include you obviously among them. And what I'm interested in too is how diverse these writers are, and the fact that they are moving away from some of the more conventional kinds of Southern literature into other kinds of writing, as you've done. I have a feeling you'll probably be circling back into other books that will take up themes and characters that are more regional probably in your career. And I wonder, I have no idea what you're working on now. I'm sure you've either finished something, or you've got something out, or you've got something in progress. Would you speak a little bit about that?
Well, I don't want to jinx it, so I'm not going to say too much, but I have been I've worked on a couple of different manuscripts for the past year, and I found that the second novel is a lot more difficult than the first. Only because there's the expectation of, of your work. When I was writing Obedience, I had no expectations at all. As I was saying earlier, there were no calls from New York. There were no questions about when is it going to be done. Right. It was just, I was just working and noodling around, playing with it. And I think with the second one, everything changes. You have the issue of money. You have the issue of sort of, your responsibility to your publisher. You have your reputation. All of that kind of comes into play, and it really kind of puts it kind of changes your style a little bit, and so I've been working to try to get the style back to where it was before I wrote Obedience, and maybe that will end up in a move toward the more regional.
Okay, well, is there anything else that we haven't touched on or talked about that you might like to add or to leave as a final word for?
I'll say it's important, I think, for writers to, as I was saying earlier, I'm going to stress it because I fully believe in this. Two things. One, don't give up when rejection comes. If you're an aspiring writer watching this, do not give up, because you're going to get rejected. It's inevitable. It happens. It happens at every stage of the game, and so you have to sort of go through that and believe in your own writing enough to say someone else is going. It only takes one. Right. Someone else is going to believe in this. Someone else is going to take it on. And second, I think it's really important to not give up any hope in literature. I see a lot of writers talking about how different and how, maybe not bad, but how much worse off the state of publishing and literature is now than it was 20 years ago. And I don't believe that. I think there are great writers working now, today, and works that will be remembered. And maybe works that won't be remembered but are still fiercely interesting in their own ways. And I don't see how it's possible to write a good work if you do not read good works. And so it's really important, I think, for all aspiring writers to know you got to read, and you have to believe in your craft to do it well.
Well, thank you, and we're looking forward to hearing you read in a little bit from your work, and we're very, very pleased that you're part of our series.
Thanks you very much. The strange thing about Williams was that nobody had ever seen him. The faculty guidebook showed a gray box labeled "Not Pictured." Group photos in the Winchester yearbooks only showed Williams' hand or arm, even though the captions advertised his presence. The college's website gave a brief CV, but no photographic evidence. By that Monday afternoon, the first day of classes for the fall term at Winchester University, the search for Williams had, for some of his students, become almost compulsive.